A day in ancient Rome, what life was really like. Running water, central heating, multi-story apartment blocks. This isn't a modern European city, it's ancient Rome. 2,000 years ago, Romans enjoyed comforts that would disappear for centuries after their empire fell. They relaxed in public baths with heated floors, feasted on exotic foods, and even flushed waste away through underground sewers. Yet behind all this sophistication was a world of strict hierarchy, bustling streets, and constant struggle. The Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents, from the misty shores of Britain to the sands of Egypt. It was home to more than 60 million people, a tapestry of cultures bound together by Roman law, language, and ambition. The Romans built cities that still stand today, designed roads so durable they outlasted kingdoms, and created systems of government that would inspire the modern world. But beyond emperors and battles, how did ordinary Romans actually live? The image most people have of Rome is shaped by movies: gladiators in shining armor, senators in white togas, endless banquets, and marble palaces. In truth, those scenes only represent a tiny slice of life. Most Romans never saw the inside of a palace, and few ever witnessed a gladiatorial fight in person. The average citizen was a craftsman, merchant, laborer, soldier, or slave. They woke before sunrise, worked long hours, and came home to cramped apartments or shared courtyards. Rome was a city of opposites: advanced and crude, rich and poor, civilized and brutal. The same aqueduct that brought water to a senator's mansion might also flood the slums. Its streets were paved with both marble and filth. To understand the real Rome, we must step into the sandals of its people and walk with them through a single day, from dawn to dusk, across the empire's heart. Roman society revolved around status. Every person belonged to a clearly defined class that dictated their rights, duties, and even their fashion. At the top were the patricians, old aristocratic families who claimed descent from the founders of Rome. They held vast estates, controlled politics, and dominated the Senate. Just below them stood the equestrians, the business class, originally the cavalrymen of the Republic, who became wealthy through trade, tax collection, and public contracts. The majority of Romans were plebeians, ordinary citizens who formed the backbone of the empire. Some were skilled artisans or small landowners, others were tenants, dock workers, or street vendors barely surviving day to day. Beneath them all were the slaves, who made up as much as 1/3 of Rome's population. Slavery was everywhere, in households, farms, mines, and even government offices. Some slaves endured harsh labor in quarries. Others worked as teachers, accountants, or secretaries. Yet Rome was not a completely closed society. Slaves could be freed through a ceremony called manumission and become freedmen, citizens with limited rights. Many freedmen built prosperous businesses and educated their children as full citizens. Social mobility was rare but possible, and ambition ran deep in Roman blood. Success was measured not just in wealth, but in honor, reputation, and the favor of powerful patrons. If you walked through ancient Rome, the first thing you would notice is the noise. The city was alive from before sunrise. Merchants shouted prices, carts rattled over stone streets, and crowds filled the marketplaces. Rome was the largest city in the world, a metropolis of over 1 million souls. Its skyline was packed with temples, basilicas, and tenement buildings called insulae, tall, narrow structures that leaned dangerously close together. For the wealthy elite, home meant luxury. They lived in houses known as domus, built around open-air courtyards with fountains, mosaics, and private shrines. These homes had distinct rooms for dining, reading, and entertaining. Walls were painted in brilliant colors: deep reds, yellows, and blacks, and floors were decorated with intricate mosaics depicting myths and nature scenes. The wealthy dined reclining on couches, served by slaves who presented dish after dish of delicacies like oysters, dormice, and roasted peacock. But for most Romans, the story was different. The majority lived in cramped apartments within those towering insulae. The ground floors often contained shops or taverns, while families squeezed into the rooms above. Water was not always available, so residents carried buckets from public fountains. Fire was a constant threat, as many buildings were made of wood and lit by oil lamps. Rent was high, space was tight, and privacy was rare. Despite these conditions, Roman cities were marvels of organization. Roads were paved, aqueducts delivered clean water, and waste flowed into an enormous sewer system known as the Cloaca Maxima. Public fountains stood at every corner, providing free access to water for citizens. Vendors sold bread, olives, cheese, and garum, the fermented fish sauce beloved by Romans of all classes. The air was filled with aromas of baking bread, incense from temples, and sometimes the less pleasant smells of animals and waste. A Roman morning began early. Bakers fired their ovens long before dawn. Farmers brought fresh produce from the countryside into the city markets. Street sweepers cleared debris, and blacksmiths pounded at their forges. The city came alive in a rhythm that had lasted for centuries. For many, the goal was survival, not comfort. But life in Rome, despite its hardships, offered a kind of energy and opportunity that drew people from across the empire. At the heart of Roman existence was the family, or familiar. It was not just a household, it was an institution that defined identity and duty. At its head stood the paterfamilias, the oldest living male, who possessed absolute authority over everyone in his family, including his wife, children, and slaves. He decided marriages, managed property, and performed religious rituals on behalf of the household gods. Marriage in Rome was less about love and more about alliance. Among the upper classes, it was a tool to secure political and economic advantage. Weddings were vibrant ceremonies filled with ancient rituals, offerings to the gods, songs, and feasts that lasted into the night. The bride wore a flame-colored veil called the flammeum and was escorted to her new home, where guests shouted good wishes as she crossed the threshold. Roman women, though excluded from politics, wielded considerable influence in other ways. They managed households, oversaw finances, and maintained the social networks that sustained Roman society. Some women, particularly from wealthy families, gained fame and power. Livia Drusilla, the wife of Emperor Augustus, was one of the most politically influential women in history, advising her husband and shaping imperial policy behind the scenes. Women could own property, run businesses, and inherit wealth, though their legal status was often tied to male guardians. Many freed women became successful merchants, midwives, or craftswomen. In the inscriptions found throughout Rome, husbands and wives often praised one another in deeply affectionate terms, suggesting that love and partnership did flourish amid the formality of Roman life. Children were valued but also disciplined. Boys were expected to carry on the family name and were trained early for public life. Education began at home, often under the supervision of Greek tutors. Boys learned reading, writing, arithmetic, and the art of rhetoric. Public speaking was essential for anyone seeking status. Girls, while not educated to the same level, were often literate and learned to manage households and finances. Childhood was brief. By their mid-teens, many boys were apprenticed or joined the army, and many girls were married. Infant mortality was high, so parents often had many children, hoping some would survive to adulthood. Yet despite these harsh realities, family affection was deep and enduring. Roman epitaphs reveal a tenderness that defies stereotypes. Fathers grieving lost daughters, wives praising the kindness of husbands, parents thanking the gods for loyal sons. Family life was both the foundation and reflection of Roman society, patriarchal, disciplined, yet bound by love and duty. Every Roman household, from the grand villas of the patricians to the tiny rooms of the poor, had its own rhythm, its own prayers, and its own daily struggle to keep the Roman way of life alive. Food was at the center of Roman life, not just as nourishment, but as a social and cultural statement. The Romans took pride in their cuisine, and dining was one of their favorite pastimes. For the wealthy, it was an art form, a chance to display refinement, generosity, and status. For the poor, food was simple but vital, a daily reminder of survival in a crowded city. A typical Roman day began with a light breakfast called ientaculum. This might include bread, cheese, fruit, or leftovers from the night before. Lunch, or prandium, was usually quick and eaten on the go, perhaps cold meats, olives, and vegetables. The real event came in the evening, the cena, the main meal of the day. Among the upper classes, the cena could last for hours. Guests reclined on couches arranged around a central table, while slaves served multiple courses and poured wine diluted with water. Eating while reclining was considered civilized. Sitting upright was the mark of the lower class. The menu of a wealthy Roman dinner was astonishingly diverse. Thanks to trade routes that stretched from Spain to Syria, the empire was a culinary crossroads. Honey, dates, pepper, and cinnamon traveled thousands of miles to grace Roman tables. They ate oysters from the coast, snails fattened in milk, and birds stuffed with herbs. A popular delicacy was dormice, small rodents served roasted or dipped in honey. Everything was seasoned with garum, a pungent fermented fish sauce that Romans poured on almost everything, from meat to desserts. For the common people, meals were simpler but hearty. Bread was the staple, sometimes flavored with olive oil or dipped in wine. Beans, lentils, porridge, and vegetables made up most of the diet. Meat was rare except for sausages or scraps bought from the market. Street food was everywhere. Vendors sold hot chickpeas, grilled meats, and bread fresh from communal ovens. Because most homes lacked kitchens, many Romans ate at taverns or thermopolis, small fast food shops with stone counters and steaming pots of stew. Drinking water wasn't always safe, so wine was the universal beverage. It was usually mixed with water, spices, or honey. Even children drank watered wine. Excessive drunkenness was frowned upon in respectable society, but taverns and night festivals could get rowdy, especially in the poorer districts where laborers gathered after a long day's work. Beyond food, Romans loved entertainment, and they built an entire culture around it. Few civilizations have ever matched their passion for spectacle. The empire was alive with music, theater, and games, but nothing captured the Roman spirit more than the arena. The Colosseum, completed in 80 CE, was a marvel of engineering, an amphitheater capable of holding up to 50,000 spectators. There, Romans watched gladiators fight for glory, criminals face wild beasts, and grand recreations of naval battles staged with real water and ships. The crowd roared with excitement, and emperors used these games to win public favor. The motto, "Bread and circuses," described it perfectly. As long as the people were fed and entertained, they remained content. Not all entertainment was so violent. Chariot racing was the most popular sport in Rome, held at the Circus Maximus, which could seat over 200,000 people. The races were fast, dangerous, and deeply competitive. Fans supported their favorite teams, the Reds, Blues, Greens, and Whites, with fierce loyalty. Riots sometimes broke out between rival supporters, much like modern sports hooliganism. Theater also flourished. Romans enjoyed comedies, tragedies, and pantomimes performed in open-air theaters. Music accompanied many performances, with instruments like flutes, drums, and lyres. For the poor, festivals offered free amusement and a sense of belonging. Nearly every month had holidays dedicated to gods, complete with feasts, parades, and games. It was a society that worked hard and celebrated harder. Education played an important role in shaping Roman identity. Although there was no public school system as we know it, Many cities had private tutors and academies. Boys from wealthy families began their studies around the age of 7, learning reading, writing, and arithmetic from a literator. Later, they advanced to a grammaticus who taught literature and history, often using Homer or Virgil as texts. Finally, the most ambitious studied under a rhetor, a teacher of oratory and philosophy, preparing them for careers in law or politics. Girls were often educated at home. While their lessons focused on domestic management, many learned to read and write. Literacy was valued throughout Roman society, and inscriptions show that even artisans and freedmen could sign their names and write messages. Romans took pride in their ability to argue, debate, and express ideas clearly, a reflection of their love for logic and law. Work defined most Romans' lives. The economy was diverse and dynamic. In the countryside, farmers cultivated wheat, olives, and grapes, the staples of Roman agriculture. Large estates, or latifundia, produced crops for export using slave labor. In cities, craftsmen made pottery, metal tools, and textiles. Merchants traded goods across the Mediterranean, and dock workers unloaded ships filled with spices, marble, and silk. Roman society admired hard work, but looked down on manual labor for the elite. The truly wealthy sought income through land ownership or political office rather than trade. However, for freedmen and lower citizens, business was a path to security. Markets buzzed with bargaining voices, and every trade had its guild. Artisans took pride in their skills, and inscriptions found in Pompeii advertise everything from bakers to barbers. Religion was woven into every moment of Roman life. The Romans were deeply spiritual people, though their beliefs were practical rather than mystical. They saw the gods as partners in maintaining order, the divine patrons who watched over every household, city, and profession. Each morning, families offered prayers and small sacrifices to the Lares and Penates, the household gods who protected their home. Shrines adorned even the smallest apartments, decorated with garlands and candles. Public religion was grand and political. The Romans worshipped a vast pantheon inherited from the Greeks and Etruscans: Jupiter, the king of the gods; Juno, protector of women; Mars, god of war; and Venus, goddess of love. Temples lined the forum, and priests performed rituals to secure the gods' favor in everything from harvests to military campaigns. Festivals like Saturnalia, held in December, turned the social order upside down. Masters served slaves, gifts were exchanged, and the streets filled with laughter and wine. Religion was also a tool of unity. As Rome conquered new territories, it absorbed local gods and cults, allowing conquered peoples to worship freely as long as they honored the emperor. Over time, this tolerance created a vast spiritual melting pot. Mystery religions from the East, such as the cults of Isis and Mithras, offered personal salvation and spread rapidly among soldiers and commoners alike. In the later centuries, one faith in particular would transform Rome forever: Christianity. Once persecuted as a threat to Roman order, it would eventually become the empire's official religion, reshaping its moral and cultural foundations. Work, worship, and leisure filled a Roman's day, but cleanliness was another passion. Hygiene wasn't merely a matter of health, it was social. Public baths, or thermae, were among the most impressive features of Roman cities. For a small fee, anyone could enter, from senators to slaves. Inside were rooms of varying temperatures: the frigidarium, a cold plunge; the tepidarium, a warm chamber; and the caldarium, a hot steam room heated by an ingenious system called the hypocaust, which circulated hot air beneath the floors. Bathing was a daily ritual. Visitors exercised in open courtyards, bathed, were massaged with oils, and socialized with friends or clients. Deals were made in the baths, gossip flowed freely, and artists displayed their latest works. Some bath complexes were enormous, complete with libraries, gardens, and snack bars. The baths of Caracalla could hold up to 1,600 bathers at once, a testament to Rome's love of luxury and innovation. Despite this sophistication, public health was still a challenge. Waste disposal systems existed, but weren't always effective. Streets often overflowed with garbage, and disease spread easily in crowded neighborhoods. Medical knowledge was limited, though Roman physicians made important advances in surgery, sanitation, and anatomy. The army's field medicine, in particular, was highly organized, with hospitals and trained medics accompanying legions on campaign. Life expectancy varied widely. The rich could live into their 60s, while the poor often died much younger. Still, Romans took pride in their resilience. In their tomb inscriptions, they celebrated a life well lived, whether that meant raising children, serving in the legions, or simply surviving the odds. The Roman military was more than just a fighting force. It was the backbone of the empire, both in power and in identity. To be a Roman soldier was to embody discipline, loyalty, and endurance. The legions were not merely armies. They were engines of civilization. They built roads, aqueducts, and forts across the known world, leaving behind the very infrastructure that held Rome together. Service in the legions was a long and demanding commitment. A Roman citizen who enlisted could expect to serve for 25 years. Training was relentless. Soldiers marched 20 miles a day in full gear, built camps from scratch every evening, and learned to fight in tight formation with precision. Their equipment was a marvel of practicality. A short sword called the gladius, a rectangular shield, and armor of overlapping metal strips known as lorica segmentate. Life on campaign was hard, but the rewards were great. Soldiers earned regular pay, bonuses, and the promise of land upon retirement. They became symbols of Roman order in distant provinces, often intermarrying with local populations and spreading Roman culture far from Italy. Military camps evolved into towns. Forts became cities. Even today, the layout of many European towns follows the grid pattern established by Roman engineers. But the army also revealed the contradictions of the empire. It brought peace through conquest, civilization through oppression. The same legions that built roads also crushed rebellions and enforced taxes. Discipline was brutal. Cowardice or disobedience could mean flogging, decimation, or crucifixion. Yet for many, the army offered something no other institution could: stability, identity, and a chance to rise in the world. While soldiers guarded the frontiers, inequality at home shaped the rhythm of Roman life. Wealth and poverty coexisted on the same streets, often within sight of one another. The elite lived in marble villas filled with art and servants, while the poor crowded into smoky tenements. The difference was stark, but accepted as the natural order of things. Charity existed, but mostly as a display of generosity by the powerful. Emperors distributed grain to the masses to prevent unrest, a program known as the annona. For millions of citizens, this free grain was the difference between survival and starvation. Slavery was the dark foundation upon which the Roman economy rested. It is impossible to understand Rome without acknowledging the scale of human bondage that powered it. Slaves worked everywhere, in fields, kitchens, workshops, and mines. Some were captured in war, others born into servitude. Their lives depended entirely on their masters. In the mines and galleys, conditions were hellish. But in urban households, slaves could live relatively comfortably, sometimes even earning wages and gaining their freedom. Skilled slaves served as teachers, doctors, and accountants. A few managed to buy their liberty, becoming freedmen who often stayed loyal to their former masters. The freedmen class was one of the most fascinating features of Roman society. Though barred from high office, freedmen could amass wealth and respect through trade and craftsmanship. Many of the successful businesses in Pompeii were owned by freedmen. They were a living example of Rome's paradox. a society built on hierarchy that still allowed ambition and achievement to transcend birth. Women, too, defied simple categorization. Officially excluded from politics, they nevertheless wielded subtle but significant power. In elite families, wives often advised their husbands on political matters, managed vast estates, and acted as hostesses for important social events. Their influence was not public, but personal, exercised through relationships, patronage, and family networks. Some women became cultural icons. Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchus brothers, was celebrated for her virtue and education. Agrippina the Younger, mother of Nero, used her intelligence and determination to shape imperial succession itself. Even among the lower classes, women contributed to economic life. They worked as midwives, vendors, and weavers, running shops or inns when widowed. Tombstones record female bakers, merchants, and artisans, proving that Roman women were not confined to the private sphere. Despite the legal constraints of a patriarchal world, many carved out spaces of independence and respect. As the empire expanded, Rome absorbed countless customs and peoples. In the bustling streets of the capital, you could hear languages from every corner of the world: Latin and Greek, Egyptian, Gaulish, and Aramaic. Traders from Syria sold silk and spices. Philosophers from Greece lectured in public squares. Soldiers from North Africa marched through triumphal arches. This blend of cultures gave Roman life its unique richness. Art and architecture reflected this diversity. The Romans borrowed from the Greeks, but added their own flair for grandeur and practicality. They mastered concrete, allowing them to build domes and vaults that seemed to defy gravity. The Pantheon, still standing today with its massive dome and open oculus, symbolizes the Roman belief that humanity could shape the world through ingenuity. Public spaces were everywhere: forums, temples, baths, theaters, and circuses. These places weren't just for leisure, they were the glue of civic life. The forum was the beating heart of every city, a marketplace, courthouse, and social hub all in one. Citizens debated politics, lawyers pleaded cases, and merchants struck deals beneath towering statues of emperors. The sheer visibility of public life was part of what made Rome so vibrant. Everyone belonged to the spectacle, whether as participant or spectator. Yet beneath the marble and ceremony was a daily reality that was far more human. People worried about rent, illness, and food. Fires, floods, and epidemics were constant dangers. Political instability meant that even the powerful could fall overnight. For the poor, there was little safety net beyond family or community charity. Still, Romans found joy where they could, in friendship, humor, and shared traditions that bound their massive empire together. Technology and innovation were other hallmarks of Roman civilization. The Romans didn't invent everything, but they perfected what they borrowed. Their engineering achievements were astonishing. Aqueducts that carried fresh water for miles, paved roads that crisscrossed continents, and sewer systems that kept cities livable. Their architecture combined beauty with function. Amphitheaters, basilicas, and baths all served practical purposes while celebrating the glory of Rome. Even in everyday tools, Roman ingenuity shone. They developed efficient farming equipment, improved shipbuilding, and created mechanical devices like water mills and cranes. Roman concrete, made with volcanic ash, has proven more durable than many modern materials. In medicine, surgeons performed cataract removals and bone repairs with instruments similar to those used today. They mapped veins and arteries, built hospitals for soldiers, and emphasized cleanliness long before germ theory was known. One of the most surprising aspects of Roman innovation was urban planning. Cities were laid out in a grid, with main streets crossing at right angles. Central forums served as both administrative and social centers. Public baths, markets, and theaters were placed strategically to promote interaction and civic pride. Even frontier towns in Britain or North Africa followed this model. demonstrating how thoroughly Roman order was imposed upon the landscape. But these advances coexisted with stark inequalities and moral contradictions. Rome could be both enlightened and cruel, tolerant and oppressive. The same civilization that built aqueducts also held gladiator games. The same citizens who discussed philosophy at dinner might own dozens of slaves. For Romans, these contradictions weren't hypocrisies. They were simply the reality of a complex, hierarchical world where power defined morality. At its peak, the Roman Empire was a vast web of trade, law, and culture connecting millions of people. A letter could travel from Egypt to Britain using a network of roads and relays. Laws written in Latin bound together communities separated by oceans. Coins bearing the emperor's face circulated everywhere, reminding citizens of the vastness of their shared world. To live as a Roman meant belonging to something immense and enduring, a civilization that saw itself as eternal. And yet, despite all its power, Rome's true strength lay in its people, the farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and soldiers whose daily efforts sustained an empire. They might never appear in history books, but their work, laughter, and dreams were the heartbeat of Rome. Their world was one of constant motion, of hope and hardship, of faith and ambition. Through their eyes, we can see Rome not as a distant empire, but as a living, breathing society that shaped the world we still inhabit. As the sun began to set over Rome, the city transformed. The heat of the day gave way to the cool hum of evening. Lanterns flickered to life, illuminating the streets with a warm glow. Market stalls closed, and workers returned home, their sandals echoing on the worn cobblestones. The smell of bread and roasting meat drifted from taverns. Families gathered for their evening meal, sharing stories of the day while sipping watered wine. The city, though weary, was far from silent. Rome, after dark, had its own rhythm, a mix of celebration and danger. Street performers played music in the squares, poets recited verses to small crowds, and dice games rolled in smoky corners. For the wealthy, the night meant elegant banquets and lively debates. For the poor, it was a time to rest before the next day's labor or to seek a brief escape in laughter and drink. Night also belonged to the city's underbelly. Thieves, gamblers, and drunks roamed the alleys. Fires were a constant threat, so patrols of watchmen, called vigiles, kept guard through the small hours, armed with buckets and torches. Even in its peace, Rome never truly slept. It was a city that pulsed with life, restless and eternal. Religion once again took center stage at day's end. Many families paused before their household shrines to thank the gods for another day of safety. Offerings of bread, wine, or incense were made to the lares and penates, guardians of the home. For Romans, religion wasn't just about temples and priests. It was a living presence woven into every routine. The favor of the gods was thought to sustain everything, from family harmony to imperial victory. This sense of divine order gave Romans their confidence, their belief that they were chosen to bring civilization to the world. They called it the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a time when their laws and culture shaped vast territories under one system. To them, the empire was not conquest, but destiny, a gift of order to a chaotic world. Yet, like all empires, Rome's peace was built on power, and that power came at a cost. Behind the triumphs were conquered peoples, taxes, and the relentless weight of empire. Despite its contradictions, the legacy of Rome remains extraordinary. The Romans invented no new philosophy, yet they perfected the art of governance and law. Their legal system became the foundation of modern justice, their roads and cities the blueprint of urban planning, and their language, Latin, the ancestor of many modern tongues. Roman architecture still shapes our public buildings, domes, arches, and columns echoing across continents. But perhaps Rome's greatest legacy is cultural resilience, the idea that civilization can be organized, rebuilt, and passed forward. Even after the empire's fall, its spirit endured. Medieval kings called themselves Caesars. Renaissance artists rediscovered Roman ideals. Modern nations still draw on its symbols of power and order. The Roman eagle, the fasces, the Senate, all reminders that the world we live in carries Rome's fingerprints. Yet to truly understand Rome, we must look not only at its monuments, but at its people. The mason laying bricks for the Colosseum, the mother teaching her child to write her name, the soldier standing guard on a frozen frontier in Britannia, the slave saving coins to buy his freedom. These were the true Romans, the countless individuals who lived, struggled, and dreamed within the vast machinery of empire. Their lives were humble, but their impact was immense. The Romans were practical, ambitious, and unrelenting. They believed in structure, discipline, and the pursuit of glory. They valued honor above comfort, community above individuality. Yet they were also deeply human, capable of love, laughter, fear, and hope. They left behind letters, graffiti, and poems that still speak across the centuries. On the walls of Pompeii, we can still read their words, messages of friendship, jokes, prayers, and sometimes heartbreak. In those simple lines, the ancient world feels astonishingly close. As the empire aged, its challenges grew. Corruption, economic strain, and endless wars eroded its strength. The capital shifted eastward to Constantinople, and the old Western Empire crumbled under the weight of invasions and decay. But even as Rome fell, its idea lived on. The roads remained, the language endured. The dream of order and greatness outlasted the empire itself. If a Roman citizen could walk through a modern city today, they would recognize much that was their own: the grid of streets, the arches of bridges, the sound of debates in halls of law. They would see echoes of their world in ours, a reminder that history is not a straight line but a circle, always returning to its roots. In the end, the daily life of the Romans was a story of contrast. Grandeur and poverty, faith and pragmatism, cruelty and kindness, all existed side by side. They were a people who could build wonders and commit atrocities, who sought beauty in art and efficiency in conquest. But above all, they were a people who believed in progress, in the idea that humanity could always build something greater. That belief, perhaps more than any monument or invention, is Rome's truest legacy. So, what can we learn from the daily life of ancient Romans? That civilization is a fragile, magnificent thing, built by ordinary hands and sustained by shared purpose. Their world reminds us that comfort and culture come not from emperors, but from the countless unnamed people who keep society moving forward. The Romans were not so different from us. They loved their families, feared change, and found joy in small pleasures. Their empire may have vanished, but their humanity remains. And perhaps that is the real reason we're still fascinated by them. When we study Rome, we're not just looking at the past, we're looking in a mirror. If you enjoyed this journey through the streets and stories of ancient Rome, consider exploring the lives of other great civilizations that shaped our world. From the pharaohs of Egypt to the philosophers of Greece, history is filled with lessons waiting to be rediscovered. And as always, share your favorite Roman fact or insight in the comments below. History lives through curiosity, and the more we ask, the more we understand who we are.